All right, we will now reconvene in open session. First, we're going to consider action on closed session items. Mrs. James?
Yes, Mr. Burdine, I move that the Board of Trustees approve Georgette Bubar to the position of Director, Strategic Transformation.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. James and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Mr. Rice?
Mr. President, I move that the Board of Trustees accept the hearing officer's recommendation concerning the Level 3 grievance appeal of Danetta Williams.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Next on our agenda, we will have our board member report. Mr. Rosenthal. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mrs. Drew.
I move that the Board of Trustees appoint Ruby Sampson as a member of the School Boundary Oversight Committee representing the community for the Willow Ridge High School feeder pattern.
Second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Drew and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Do we need to discuss something? Motion passes. Do we have any other action items from closed session? No. All right, moving along to board member reports. Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes. Once again, it's been a busy month. This month, board members attended the State of the City, Sugarland, High School Sportsmanship Luncheon, Fort Bend Chamber Chairman's Gala, Honor Choir 11th Annual Elementary Festival, NSBA Advocacy Institute, Historically Black Colleges and Universities College Fair, Leadership 101 Session 5, Annual Football Signing Day, 2020 Grassroots Meeting, GCAASB Gulf Coast Association of School Boards, that was the grassroots meeting, Business Partners Breakfast, Center for the Reform of School Systems Alumni Retreat, grand opening of the shop, the salon, and the grill at CTE Center, Fort Bend Scholarship Dance, 2020 Literacy Tour, Board Workshop Meeting, 2020 Candidates Forum, House District 26, put on by Raise Your Hand, Fort Bend ISD Teacher of the Year Reception, regular business meeting, Bonnie and Clyde Musical at Dulles High School, Lucky Stiff Musical at Elkins High School, The Heathers at Clements High School, Once Upon a Mattress at Austin High School, Aida at Bush High School, Policy Committee meeting, Vision and Planning Committee meeting, SHAC meeting, Girls Basketball Playoff games, that one's already there, Ridge Point High School Performance of Noises Off, Texas Music Education Association Convention and Performances, and that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Next are our special reports. Mrs. James.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Burdine. I'd like to report that regarding the National School Boards Association Advocacy Institute, Mr. Rice, Mr. Burdine, and myself attended from the district, and we had a very beneficial and successful visit. On Tuesday, February 4th, we called upon our Texas legislators, Senator John Cornyn, Senator Ted Cruz, Congressman Pete Olson, Congressman Al Green, and Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher. We discussed many important items with these members of the legislature, including IDEA, our pre-K initiatives, our Early Literacy Center, our Early Intervention Academy, our CT programs and their relationship to the Federal Perkins Act, safety and security planning, and appropriations issues related to Title I, Title II, and IDEA. We found our legislators to be receptive to our concerns. The senators were quite busy because of the impeachment hearings that were going on while we were there, but Senator Cornyn did stop by and visit briefly with some of the Texas trustees, but Senator Cruz was presiding on the Senate floor when we were there, so we were not able to visit with him personally. We did, however, meet with one of Senator Cruz's staffers, who's a product of Texas Public Schools. The legislature was also distracted because the State of the Union was going on that night, it was exciting for us to be in town when all these things were happening, but their schedules were very busy, so that impacted a little bit of it impacted our schedule quite a bit. We did have the opportunity, and I'd like to point out that we visited with Congressman Fletcher's office, and her advisor on education policy is Christopher Harvey. He's a graduate of Hunters Glen Elementary, Lake Olympia Middle School, and Hightower High School. And he currently, as I said, focuses on education policy. So I'd like to be sure that we invite him in the very near future to come visit our district, especially when they have the Early Literacy Center at Hunters Glen, as he attended school there. The conference was well attended. There were over 800 school board trustees from around the country, but the Texas delegation was the largest there, and so that's my report.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mr. Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. A couple of weeks ago, Mr. Burdine, Mrs. James, and Dr. Dupree and I attended the Center for Reform of School Systems conference. They hold this every year about this time, and we made a presentation on entitled Turning It Around, about the progress Fort Bend ISD has made from 2005 to the present time, which was very well received. Mrs. James and I attended several other sessions on Friday and Saturday morning, and came away with, me in particular, a new profound appreciation for the efforts of Mr. Pham in keeping all of our data secure, since we learned that public school districts are the #1 target for cyber crime because of the thousands of employees with Social Security numbers, dates of birth, and direct deposit. So shout out to you, Mr. Pham, for your efforts in that regard. Last weekend, I attended the Mexican American School Board Association Conference in San Antonio, Texas. It was a very good conference, very well attended, and they had a very good speaker Saturday morning, very good speaker that just makes me want to make sure that we redouble our efforts to reach out to our homeless students, of which we have some who qualify as being homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act, but maybe we have some who qualify in a harsher definition. So I know we're doing a lot to help all of our kids everywhere, but it never hurts to be reminded that they are human beings, they're not statistics. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Do we have any other special reports?
I'd like to add to that special report. I too attended that conference.
And Mr. Rosenthal.
My apologies, Mrs. Drew. I'm sorry.
All right. We will now consider our consent agenda. Does anyone want to remove any items from the consent agenda this evening?
Yes, I'd like to remove 11A to B and 11E1.
All right. Someone like to make a motion?
Mr. President, I move to accept the consent agenda in its entirety with the exception of item A to B and item E1.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes.
Mr.
have-
President,
go ahead.
Mr. President, I move to approve policy BED local as presented with a modified last section.
We have a motion by Mrs. James and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Mrs. James, can you please read?
Yes, let me read the last section. The presiding officer or designee shall determine whether an individual requesting to address the board has attempted to resolve the matter through resolution procedures established by policy. If not, the individual shall be referred to the appropriate policy to seek resolution, but shall have also have the opportunity to participate in the public comment section of the meeting. The following policies describe the complaint and grievance process available to members of the district community: employee complaints, DGBA, student or parent complaints, FNG, and public complaints, GF.
Please vote. All right. Please vote again. Motion passes. May I have a motion for 11E1?
Yes, Mr. President, I move that we approve 11E1 as presented.
We have a motion by Mrs. James and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Do we have discussion, Mrs. James?
Thank you for calling on me, even though I couldn't get my triangle to stand up. Yeah, I have two areas of question. One is regard to the general education staffing. I asked about this a little bit earlier today or last night or yesterday or over the weekend. And I got in response some numbers of students, but I was having trouble translating that into the positions for the general ed side. So how did the number of students translate to a position? Or how many positions do those numbers translate to?
So when we do the allocation of staffing, we use the staffing allocation models that are approved by the Department of School Leadership. Those are run through, so the numbers that you're seeing that are included as part of that have taken into consideration two things. One, the staffing allocation, but also the demographer report that we presented earlier. One thing that I'll say that typically when we do that agenda item, we will specifically reference it has utilized that demographer data. We did not put that in there this time. That was an oversight. But the numbers that you're seeing are related specifically to staffing guidelines, both at the high school, middle, and elementary level, and then utilizing the demographer information to actually propagate those information down to the school level. So the numbers you're seeing are related to the demographer report and the staffing needs based on student to teacher ratios.
Brian, I think what I'm hearing is what is a rule of thumb number students to teachers? So if you got your enrollment, what would you divide that by to get the number of teachers we're asking for?
The ratios at each level.
Well, I was asking that, but then, because then it also says we have 527 new elementary school teachers, but I don't think we're necessarily asking for elementary school teachers, if I remember the item correctly. So that, I was just trying to understand the justification, essentially, between the numbers and the staff positions you're requesting.
So if to answer the ratio question first, we use a 22-to-1 ratio at the elementary level. At the high school, for the non-title campuses, it would be at 25-to-1, and at title campuses, we use 24-to-1 for the title campuses. So those are the numbers that we would use to calculate the additional teachers needed. Going back to the demographer discussion earlier, if the numbers don't exactly make it a campus, or they're over, we'll see some balancing between the actual enrollment and the actual demographer report. So I think that part of the reason you don't necessarily see a large number increase year over year is that in some cases enrollment may not have materialized at as high a level as what was in the initial report from the 1920 school year.
Okay, I I thank you for the ratios. I think that I can use a calculator, and I think I can follow that. And I guess the middle school ratios are the same for middle school and high school, this all secondary?
Secondary is that, yes, ma'am, they are the same.
Okay. All right, so thank you for that. And then my second question, I guess, or comment question, or yeah, I think it's, I'd just like to hear a response possibly. So we've got a lot of staff additions based on special education. We've got some CTE, we've got fine arts, and I asked for a little more explanation of that, so I'd be prepared to explain that in community. But what I don't see here is anything about for gifted and talented education. And I know we've been working on doing sort of a universal screening process and bringing more kids into the program and all that. And so I was wondering how we're addressing the needs of those newly identified kids.
Well, in the teacher allocation, some of those teachers at the elementary, middle, or high school may be designated for gifted and talented students. So that's how those teachers will be allocated. And when we think about support for gifted and talented as that grows, we're looking and we would consider any central office positions at a later date. But the general ed staffing, when we allocate teachers, because of the program model that we use, some of those teachers would be designated as GT teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Please vote. Motion passes. Next on our agenda is our action item, which we did a little out of order. So we've already approved that. And then after that, we will review our future board meeting agenda items, Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. So March, we're going to have more budget conversation as well as a safety and security master plan update, along with a live demo of our See Something, Say Something app. So we're looking forward to that. We're going to talk about early literacy, talk about the board self-evaluation, internal audit committee recommendations. You can kind of see, I'm not going to read it all to you. But those are the big things. Budget, as you can see, are the major issues coming up. In April, we do have some planned reports on special education and gifted and talented, along with some other routine items.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
This meeting is adjourned.